Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be tackling, I guess, a challenge that I think is increasingly impacting all of us. That's learning in these multitasking environments.
Oh, yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
the kind where your phone is pinging and there's music playing and maybe even a TV on in the background.
Right.
We're going to kind of dissect how this constant juggling act
Mm-hmm.
affects our ability to really learn,
Mm-hmm.
especially for students facing a world, saturated with technology.
It's really, a fascinating area and one with some pretty significant implications, I think.
Yeah.
Research shows that a whopping 78% of American teenagers own cell phones,
Wow.
and about a quarter of them primarily use their phones to go online.
Wow, that's a huge number.
It is.
Yeah.
Add to that, the Kaiser Family Foundation found that 8 to 18-year-olds spend a considerable amount of time each day consuming media
Right.
while multitasking.
Right. It's almost become second nature, hasn't it?
It has, yeah.
We see it in classrooms, too. Studies show that 2/3 of students use electronic media during class or while doing homework.
Oh, wow.
And a staggering 91% of college students admit to texting during class.
It's become so pervasive, and I think it raises a critical question. What's the real cost
Yeah.
of this constant multitasking, especially when it comes to learning?
Right.
To understand this, we need to differentiate between two types of multitasking.
Okay.
Concurrent multitasking, where you're attempting to do two things
Right.
at the same time,
Okay.
and task switching, where you're rapidly shifting your focus between different tasks.
So is one inherently worse than the other?
Research suggests that task switching is the bigger culprit when it comes to hindering performance.
Mhm.
Decades of studies have shown that every time we switch tasks, our brains have to reorient themselves.
Yeah.
And that comes with a cost, a switching cost, as it's called.
Right.
It takes time and mental energy to refocus, and that can significantly impact how efficiently we learn.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But are we saying that all multitasking is bad? I mean, sometimes it feels like you have to juggle multiple things
Right.
just to get through the day.
That's a great question.
Right.
And it's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
A study by Adler and Ben Boone and Fitch in 2012
Okay.
found that when the main task is fairly easy, being forced to multitask,
Uh-huh.
what they called mandatory multitasking actually led to better performance.
Oh.
It's almost as if those forced breaks and mental shifts prevent boredom and keep you engaged.
So a little bit of forced multitasking can actually be beneficial in some cases.
Yeah, it is. It is, isn't it?
That's surprising.
However, the same study found that when the task is more difficult, mandatory multitasking was a recipe for disaster.
Oh.
Performance plummeted compared to either discretionary multitasking, where you choose when to switch tasks, or sequential task completion, where you focus on one task at a time.
So it's all about context.
Yes.
The type of task and our control over the multitasking seem to play a big role.
Absolutely.
But how does all of this relate to our brain's ability to process information effectively?
This is where we delve into some fundamental cognitive theories. One of the foundational concepts is Broadbent's theory of selective attention, developed in the 1950s.
Okay.
It emphasizes that our brains have a limited capacity
Okay.
to process information from multiple sources simultaneously.
So even if we feel like we're masters of multitasking, our brains are actually struggling to keep up.
That's the idea. And Lang's limited capacity model builds upon this by suggesting that when we try to multitask, especially with complex information, our cognitive resources get stretched too thin.
Okay.
This can lead to memory failures because our brains are overwhelmed during encoding, storage, and retrieval processes. It's like trying to run too many demanding programs on your computer at the same time.
Yeah.
Eventually, things start to slow down, and some processes might even crash.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
It really highlights the limitations we're dealing with.
Exactly.
But let's get specific. How does this play out in real-life learning situations?
Well, there's a fascinating study from 2009 by Ophir, Nass, and Wagner
Okay.
that sheds some light on this. They found that even people who identify as heavy multitaskers and believe they're good at it may actually be less efficient at processing information. They might be able to handle like those surface level tasks,
Uh-huh.
but when it comes to deeper processing and comprehension, they really struggle.
It's almost like skimming the surface, but never really diving deep into the material.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's especially concerning in educational settings.
Right.
Imagine a student trying to focus on a challenging textbook chapter
Yeah.
while their phone is buzzing with notifications. Research has shown that even the mere presence of these gadgets can disrupt our initial orientation to a learning task.
Yeah, it's almost like our brains are wired to get pulled away by those potential distractions,
Yeah.
even if we don't consciously give in to them.
That's a great way to put it. It's like our attention gets momentarily hijacked
Yeah.
by the possibility of something more stimulating or entertaining popping up
Hmm.
on our screens. And even if we manage to resist the urge to check our phones, our focus has already been compromised.
So it's not just about actively engaging with distractions, it's about the constant potential for distraction that chips away at our ability to focus.
Exactly. And this has a ripple effect on all aspects of learning.
Yeah.
Studies have shown that homework completion suffers when students are simultaneously engaged in electronic tasks.
Right.
It's simply not possible to give your full attention to writing a paper or solving a math problem while also chatting with friends or scrolling through social media.
It's like trying to cook a gourmet meal while juggling flaming torches and riding a unicycle.
Exactly.
Something's bound to get burned.
And in the classroom setting, the presence of communication devices can be incredibly disruptive, not only for the individual student, but for those around them.
Right.
It creates this ripple effect of distraction.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that as a teacher. It only takes one phone going off to derail an entire lesson.
Absolutely. The research supports that anecdotal experience.
Yeah.
Studies have shown that classroom learning is negatively affected when students use phones or laptops for non-academic purposes.
So we're seeing a pretty clear pattern here.
Ah,
Multitasking, especially with technology, has a detrimental impact on learning,
yeah.
both in and out of the classroom. But let's look at the research on academic performance.
Mhm.
Specifically,
Right.
what does it tell us?
Well, it's not exactly a rosy picture. A 2011 study by Junko and Cotton found a correlation between frequent Facebook use during study time
Okay.
and lower GPAs.
So the more distractions, the worse we learn.
Right.
It's a pretty straightforward equation. But let's dive into a specific study that really brings this to life. Kuznikoff and colleagues in 2013 conducted a fascinating study on the impact of multitasking on memory for lecture material. Can you walk us through that one?
Absolutely. They randomly assigned students to different multitasking conditions while listening to a lecture.
Okay.
Some were allowed to use Facebook, others instant messaging,
Yeah.
some texting, and some email.
So they were simulating a real-life classroom environment where students might be tempted to multitask.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the results were quite striking.
Yeah.
The students in the Facebook and instant messaging conditions performed significantly worse on memory tests
Wow.
compared to the control group. They simply couldn't retain the information as effectively.
So it seems like those particular platforms were especially disruptive to the learning process.
Yeah.
What about texting and email?
Interestingly, texting had less of an impact because phones were placed away.
Okay.
And email didn't disrupt as much because there were no incoming message alerts. But here's the kicker.
Okay.
You even though those activities didn't show a statistically significant difference on their own when all the technology usage conditions were combined, students still performed worse than the control group.
So even what we might consider on-task multitasking, like quickly looking up a term mentioned in the lecture,
Yeah.
can still have a negative impact.
Exactly. It interrupts the flow of information,
Right.
prevents deeper processing,
Yeah.
and ultimately hinders our ability to learn and retain information effectively.
This all feels a bit overwhelming. Are we doomed to struggle with learning in this tech-filled world? Is there any hope for us multitaskers?
Not at all. It's not about abandoning technology altogether. It's about being more strategic and mindful in how we use it.
So how do we do that? What are some practical strategies for mitigating the negative impacts of multitasking?
Well, first and foremost, it's about being more aware of our own multitasking habits
Okay.
and how they affect us.
You mean developing a kind of metacognitive awareness of our own thought processes?
Yes, exactly. It's about recognizing when we're multitasking, understanding why we're doing it, and assessing whether it's truly serving us or hindering our progress.
So it's about stepping back and observing our own behavior, rather than just mindlessly going along with it.
Precisely. And once we have that awareness, we can start making more conscious choices about how we engage with technology.
So what would that look like in practice? Give us some concrete examples.
Well, one of the simplest but most effective strategies is to create distraction-free zones. If you're studying or working on a project that requires focused attention, turn off notifications on your phone, Close unnecessary tabs or windows on your computer,
Uh-huh.
and put away any other potential distractions.
It's all about minimizing those tempting cues that pull us away from the task at hand.
Exactly. And it's also about being deliberate in your technology use. If you need to look something up online, do it quickly,
Okay.
and then return to your primary task.
Yeah.
Don't get sucked into the rabbit hole of the internet.
It's like setting boundaries with technology.
Yeah.
We need to be the ones in control,
Yeah.
not the other way around.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's about making even simpler adjustments. Turning off background music, especially if it's lyrical, can improve focus. Even having a designated workspace separate from your leisure or social spaces can help condition your brain for focused learning.
It's all about creating the right conditions for our brains to thrive.
And don't forget the power of breaks. Stepping away from screens, moving your body, and engaging in activities that don't require constant mental stimulation are essential
Yeah.
for recharging those cognitive batteries.
It's like hitting the reset button on our brains.
Exactly.
We all need that downtime to process information and consolidate learning.
And it's often during those moments of quiet reflection that the real aha moments occur.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not just about stuffing our brains with information. It's about giving them the space and time to make sense of it all.
We often feel pressured to be constantly on
Yeah.
in today's fast-paced world,
Yeah.
but our brains simply aren't wired for that.
So how do we shift our mindset to embrace a more balanced approach to technology and learning?
It starts with recognizing that it's a journey, not a destination. There will be times when we succumb to the allure of multitasking, and that's okay. The key is to notice those moments, learn from them, and gradually make adjustments that support our overall well-being and our ability to learn effectively.
So it's about progress, not perfection. And it's about finding what works best for us as individuals.
Absolutely. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Yeah.
It's about experimenting with different strategies,
Yeah.
paying attention to how they affect our focus and productivity, and gradually building a personalized toolkit for thriving in a multitasking world.
That's a really empowering message.
Yeah.
It means we're not, victims of our technology. We have the power to shape our relationship with it.
Precisely. And by understanding the cognitive costs of multitasking and making more conscious choices about how we engage with technology, we can reclaim our attention and create learning environments that support, deep, meaningful learning.
So to wrap up our deep dive today, let's distill all this down to some key takeaways for our listeners. What's the one thing you want them to remember about the challenge of learning in multitasking environments?
The key takeaway is this. Our brains are not designed for true multitasking.
Right.
Every time we switch tasks, there's a cognitive cost.
Yeah.
And while some multitasking is unavoidable in our modern lives, it's crucial to be aware of the potential drawbacks, especially when it comes to learning.
So we need to be more intentional about when we choose to multitask
Right.
and when we need to create those distraction-free zones to allow for deep focus.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between leveraging technology's power for good while also protecting our precious cognitive resources.
And as we've discussed, there are practical strategies we can all implement to manage multitasking more effectively, whether it's turning off notifications, creating designated workspaces, or simply taking regular breaks to recharge.
It's about being proactive and taking ownership of our attention. It's about recognizing that our ability to learn and thrive in the world depends on it.
I love that. It's a call to action for all of us to become more mindful and intentional in how we navigate this increasingly demanding digital landscape. So as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought-provoking question to ponder. We've seen that even on-task multitasking can hinder deeper processing and understanding. Considering this, what adjustments can you make to your learning environment or any environment where you need to focus to maximize focus and knowledge retention?
Perhaps a designated study space, free of distractions, a commitment to single tasking during challenging activities, or a conscious effort to be more present and mindful when engaging with learning materials. The choice is yours, but the impact on your learning could be profound.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
It was my pleasure.
It's been a fascinating and insightful deep dive into the challenges and opportunities of learning in a multitasking world. And to our listeners, we hope you've gained some valuable insights and practical tips for navigating this complex landscape. Until next time, keep those brains engaged.